Don't be home alone. It happened a few years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. It seemed like just another November Friday night in my quiet home in Ohio. I live on the border of the country area, with a thick forest and, further on, a field across from my house. I should probably note that I only had a few houses surrounding me. Not really many of my friends lived where I was. There was the old couple to my left. They usually have family over on the weekends, but tonight it was quiet and calm over there. To my right there was a middle-aged couple. They were gone that night as they routinely work night shifts at wherever they work. Finally, across and far down to the left of my house was another nice couple who have a very sweet 4-year-old who always loves to come over and be with me and my 9-year-old brother. My parents decided to go out and be together for the night. Whenever they do this, they are usually out pretty late into the morning, and my brother was sleeping over a friend's house. I was tired that night, so I decided to stay home and enjoy a relaxing night at home while the snow began to fall throughout the night. It was mostly uneventful that evening. Some television early on, and then some Xbox 2 later on. I remember eating some rice and chicken that night, but it would be important to note also that I neither drank or did any drugs that night, so I knew what to come was real. The clock just struck 11 p.m. only a few minutes back, and I was well into a fun match of Halo when I got the feeling something was just wrong. I brushed it off as just me being alone and getting those weird feelings one gets sometimes when alone. Then, just as it began to slip my mind, I heard it. Smack, smack, smack. Fear gripped me for moments as I realized that sound was neither from me or my TV. It was much louder and clear than anything that could have come from the TV. I turned white as I realized it came from the window right above the couch. And me. I turned around in haste and lifted the blinds to see no one. Nothing out of sorts. The snow was falling and everything looked disturbingly normal. Oh, I thought to myself. Probably just rocks carried by the wind, or maybe snow or ice from the roof that fell. Despite this self-assurance, I was still gripped with this feeling that something was just wrong and that whatever hit that window was no accident of nature. I then decided to quench my nerves by going into the office and playing games or watching porn on the computer. Just something to get my mind off of that. For about 30 minutes it worked. I thought to myself, I'm just being silly and I should enjoy this quality time home by myself. About 34 to 38 minutes after my first occurrence there came a whomp 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 from the window to my right in the office. I wanted to throw up. I knew then that this was no coincidence and that this was not of the weather or an animal. It was too consistent. Too intentional. I immediately ran from my seat to the kitchen where I grabbed the family flashlight and a large knife. One for investigation and one for defense, if what to come was as bad as my gut was telling me. I ran back down and shined the flashlight out the window into the yard and the forest. I saw nothing, except what I thought were light footprints from the window to the forest in the traced snow on the ground. My mind raced from what this could be to what could happen. I had never been embraced by this much fear in my life. I called my mom, hoping she would answer. Once I was able to reach her, I told her the events of the night, and she then said in a hopeful yet dead serious tone, "Lock the doors. If it happens again, call the cops. Be safe." My parents were about an hour and a half away, and they offered to come home, but I refused, trying to be considerate of not ruining their evening together. I went to each door and locked them, to each window and locked, then up to my room with a phone, a knife and a flashlight. I still rejected that this could be real, so I put on some music from my phone and put my earbuds in, hoping to fall asleep and wake up realizing this was just a nightmare or a bad case of my head messing with me. I was listening to Queen and on the verge of sleep when I thought I heard something in the completely quiet house. I took my earbuds off to hear a whack whack whack. With each beat my heart sunk more and more. After a few moments it stopped, but I was too afraid to move from my bed and I called my parents. Within about 45 minutes my parents came home, without further incident. By this time it was about 3 a.m. I recalled as much as I could and showed them everything. Us three searched the outside of the house, with my dad holding his handgun in case we did find anything. Again 7. Nothing was found, except for deep footprints in the several-inch deep snow now that circled the house several times, stopping in front of the windows and the side door, which upon inspection was beat and crushed in the center with what seemed like a big hammer or blunt object. We waited in the house until morning, until my dad decided to go outside to the forest to see where the tracks led. When he came back, we learned that the tracks led to a small shelter that housed several photographs of our house and a small sledgehammer with pieces of wood stuck on it, with tracks leading to a road far across the field. I never stayed in the house alone at night for several years after this. I was home alone when I heard laughter downstairs. I longed for the nights where my mother would don an evening gown, punctuate every sentence of her lecture with the clicks and the clacks of her high heels as she strutted to the door, and leave a deep red imprint of her lips on my forehead before she allowed herself to be whisked away by her suitor of the night. Those nights are rare when your single mother works 12-hour shifts at the local nursing facility and comes back home to a long evening of drinking, loud television, and heated arguments with her children. This night was better than all the others because the universe had aligned the plans of everyone in the household to coincide, leaving me behind for at least 5 hours worth of quite alone time, something I rarely got. I was in my bedroom, my secret stash of snacks scattered all over my bed, and the one shared laptop we had in the house all to myself. I didn't know what I wanted to do first. Watch a movie? Sing along to karaoke songs on YouTube? Have a one-woman dance party? I settled upon watching a scary movie and turned off all the lights to set the mood. I was barely past the 30-minute mark when I heard the distant sound of snickering. For a few seconds, I convinced myself that it was just a background noise in the movie I was watching, but my reassurance faltered when I paused the film and still heard it. I was frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. I just waited for something to happen, but nothing did. I slowly shifted my position. The bed frame creaked under my weight as I did so. I planted both my feet on the ground and paused for a few minutes. It was most probably one of my siblings who had come home early and was playing a prank on me. It could have even been one of my neighbor's kids. Whoever it was, I was a 16-year-old girl who wasn't taking any chances. I finally had the mind to scan the room for anything I could use to defend myself. I shared a room with 6- and 8-year-old girls. The entire place was childproof, and my best bet was a heavy sports trophy, but I figured that it was better than nothing. The snickering got louder and nearer. It was turning into chuckles. I didn't know whether I wanted to wait in here until I was found or do the finding myself. I took another long, hard look at the trophy in my hands and decided to wait. With each minute that passed, the laughter increased in volume and enthusiasm. It sounded like a child who knew his parents were heading towards his hiding spot during a game of hide-and-seek, laughing with the voice of an adult. Then, I heard the sounds of chairs being dragged across the hardwood floor. It didn't sound like it was with much purpose other than to clear them out of the way. A slippery, slobbery wet noise followed suit. It sounded familiar, yet it wasn't one I had particularly heard before. Whoever was in my kitchen was slamming, ripping apart and mushing whatever it was he had in his hands. I heard squishes and squelches, and I could only assume that it was some sick psychopath with a fetish for breaking into houses and mauling large animals. Whatever it was, he was laughing throughout. I was terrified. There was a stranger in my kitchen, laughing manically as he seemingly prepared himself a snack on the counter. There was an intruder in the downstairs of my house, the place where I had left my cell phone. I turned around and looked at my laptop, wondering if the police would respond to emails. I decided to give it a try anyway and tiptoed back to my bed. My trembling fingers struggled to type slowly and quietly, but I eventually managed to send an email and post for help on social media. An excruciating 7 minutes passed by until I heard someone pull up on the driveway. It didn't sound like the police. I heard the sound of heavy footsteps running up to the front door, frantically jamming a key into the keyhole and swinging the door open. The laughter stopped for a brief second before it turned into a roaring guffaw. A shriek and an ear-piercing scream penetrated the silence of the neighborhood, and whoever produced it turned around and ran towards the street, taking their screams with them. The manic laughter followed suit, and I finally dared to run to the bedroom window. I saw my sister running down the street while screaming, trying to attract as much attention as she could, and by the looks of it, she was succeeding. Running in the opposite direction was a naked man covered in a massive amount of blood that I had only seen before on television. He was still roaring with laughter as he disappeared out of sight. I watched out of the window as a posse gathered just outside my house. My sister hadn't stopped screaming. I realized that she wasn't just trying to attract attention, but she was actually hysterical, and I did not want to go downstairs and greet whatever had brought my sister to such a state. The crowd grew larger as the flashing red and blue lights arrived and footsteps stormed into my house. I heard curses and retches downstairs before someone finally called out. All I could manage to produce at first was a squeak. A female officer appeared in my doorway and asked me if I was all right. She told me to follow her with my eyes closed. Great advice for a rebellious teenager. I noticed her grasp become tighter as we reached the bottom of the stairs, and I couldn't help treating myself to a peek. Through squinted eyes, I saw the dismembered body parts of my mother neatly arranged beside her decapitated head on the kitchen counter. I passed out. 47 minutes. That was how long I had spent listening to my mother being torn into, ripped apart, mutilated and eaten. The person responsible for that ran straight to his nursing facility, straight to his bedroom and straight into bed. He laughed as they restrained him to his bed. He laughed as he was taken away in cuffs. He laughed as he was locked up in a cell. He laughed as he made eye contact with me in the courtroom as his sentence was being announced. I won't be surprised if he was still laughing when they strapped him to the chair. He will never laugh again. Nor will my mother. Well, I thought I was home alone. Okay guys, I've been reading a lot of posts of y'all's experiences and creepy encounters. Now I have lots of different and terrifying experiences, but the most recent one and easily remembered one is a good starting point. I was 19 at the time, and I was home visiting my parents and grandmother on Christmas break from college. A little insight on my parents' and grandmother's house is that it is a 2-story home and it's not abnormally old for a house. Maybe around 50 years old at this time, maybe a tad bit older than that. I don't know of any dark history on the land at all other than my grandfather passing away in my grandmother's room back in '99 with lung cancer. It wasn't a surprise. The hospital let him go home to die in peace, and we all knew it was coming. He had a great life, so nothing sinister that I know of. Anyway, my parents, sister and grandmother were all out doing something. I can't remember what exactly they were doing in town. So they asked me to stay at the house to feed the dogs. My grandmother has like 10 dogs because after my grandfather passed, all she's really done is try to fill a void. Which is understandable in a way, but seriously, she has way too many fucking dogs. I agreed I would stay at the house for them. I'm a homebody anyway and don't really like being around crowds, so I kinda looked forward to being alone by myself with satellite TV. My grandmother and my room were on the main floor while my parents and my sister's room were upstairs on the second floor. My sister was 15 at this point, but she had this pink star-shaped doorbell on the outside of her door that's been up since she was a kid. It's probably been about an hour at this point since I've been alone. I was watching some documentary on the History Channel when I heard stomping around coming from upstairs. Now I've heard some footsteps upstairs before when I was home alone and even with friends over. Yeah, kinda creepy, but I was kind of used to it by now. From where I was sitting, I can see the entrance to the stairs to the right. I didn't really pay any mind to it, so I continued watching TV. It was probably around 10 minutes ago since I heard the footsteps when I heard that fucking little doorbell go off twice in a row upstairs on my sister's door. Every hair on my body stood up. I muted the TV and listened for about a minute. Nothing happened. I told myself that the thing is a little old and might have some faulty wiring. Right before I turned up the volume, it went off again. Only once this time. Like it was messing with me. I stared at the stairs, almost expecting someone to come down and laugh and say it was a joke, but nothing. I went up to the stairs and looked up at the stairway leading into pitch blackness. I was scared to turn on the light and illuminate someone standing at the top of the stairs next to my sister's room. But I turned on the light anyway. And there was nothing there. I went up the stairs and turned on all the lights and went up to my sister's door and pressed the doorbell button. It worked normal and there wasn't any problem that I could see on it. So I took it off the wall and took out the batteries and put them in my pocket, leaving the batteryless doorbell on the bed. I turned around and started walking out of the room when as I got to the door, the fucking doorbell went off again. Chills instantly went down my spine, and I felt a presence I've never felt in that house before. I went downstairs trying not to freak out and felt the batteries moving around in my pocket. It went off again several times in a row before abruptly stopping mid-ring. I thought that maybe if I ignore it that it will go away. so I thought I would watch something cheery. I found a SpongeBob marathon. It has been probably around an hour since the doorbell incident, and I've nearly forgotten about the whole thing when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black mass the shape of a huge dog. Now my grandma only owns Shih Tzus and a Chihuahua, so there isn't anything taller than my knee in the house. But this black sorta transparent mass was huge, like a big-ass wolf. It went from the hallway behind the couch, then sprinting out the back door, causing the big heavy back door to fly open and slam into the wall. I jumped so high out of the chair and every dog in the house was flipping shit. Not like the annoying bark they do when someone strange is around, but more like they were terrified. I jumped up and ran outside to try to see this mass, but only catching the ass end of it running into our workshop. We had a motion light out there and it triggered the light on in front of the shop. The shop was obviously not in use, so the light inside was off and all you can see from the outside is the door slightly open but nothing but darkness from inside. After this thing ran inside the shop, it turned around and stared at me through the slightly open door. Now this is what gave me nightmares for a long time. When it stared at me, it had this yellow glow emitting from its eyes. That stopped me dead in my tracks. I no longer wanted to pursue this thing. I called a friend to let them know what happened and talked to them until my family came home. I haven't really told my family what happened that night, because I didn't want to freak them out or have them telling me I'm crazy. I'm a pretty logical guy who doesn't really believe in paranormal things. I've had a lot of weird and creepy experiences in my life, and maybe I'll tell you guys some more stories sometime, but that was one that really tripped me out and kept me up for a long time. Don't stay at your parents' house alone. I, 21M, stumbled across here a couple weeks ago and have been reading lots of the posts. I thought I would share a story that happened about a year ago that has changed how I view living alone. At the time I lived at my parents' house because the cost of living was so expensive. I was a university student working casual jobs and couldn't afford to move out. One day, my parents left to go on a business trip in France and decided to make a family vacation out of it. It was in the middle of exam period, so I couldn't go, but they took my 4 siblings. I was ecstatic since I could have the whole house to myself. They left early Monday morning. I looked forward to being the man of the house for the upcoming week. Everything was great until around 7 p.m. the next night. I was driving back home on a long, dimly lit road leading towards my street. Suddenly, I spotted a bald, shirtless man walking alongside the street carrying a shovel. Even though I saw him momentarily, his figure is etched in my brain. He was as pale as the moon and his eyes were lifeless and empty. We live in a suburban area, far from any farmland. I couldn't imagine what someone would need a shovel for at this time of night. I kept driving. Checking no one had followed me, I drove into the garage and closed the door. Of course no one followed me, I chuckled to myself as I went about making dinner. By the next day, I had convinced myself that he might have just been lost or had dementia or something. Having 3 looming exams around the corner helped me forget about the man. I studied at home that day, which meant I got to practice a new prelude for piano, as I studied music theory. I studied hard, only to stop for food and the occasional YouTube video until I noticed the time, 7:34 p.m. Damn it, I muttered as I realized that I had forgot to bring my washing in. It would have to go in the dryer now. I grabbed a basket and went outside, soaking in the soft night sounds of crickets and rustles in the leaves. Suddenly, I heard movement down my driveway. Moving quietly, I tentatively approached the end of the driveway, outlined by a perimeter of bushes. "Hey, who's there?" I asked nervously. No answer. As I waited near the bushes, I braced myself for a shovel to come towards my face. There was only more rustle of leaves, then silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for someone to appear, but no one did. Returning to the clotheslines, I grabbed the basket and went back inside, ensuring the door was locked behind me. It was now Wednesday, and I was more than just a bit nervous. I checked that every window and door were locked several times before leaving for university. I couldn't focus in class. I was still thinking about the man I saw on Monday night. When I arrived home, I took out a packet of 2-minute noodles and watched Breaking Bad. We live in a bigger house, which unfortunately means it creaks a lot more on its own when no one is making any noise. The house is equipped with a motion detecting system, but I don't trust its accuracy, so I did laps throughout the house whenever I heard a creak that was a bit too loud. Every time I walked past the windows outlooking our backyard, I expected to see that pale face pushed up against the window looking inside. I wanted to call the police to just ask them to drive around my street and see if anyone was lurking, but I felt embarrassed for getting so worked up over no physical evidence. I decided against calling the police and shortly went to bed, accompanied by nothing but the howling wind outside. It was now Thursday, which meant another day of practicing at home. Having finished my practice at around 8 p.m., I got up to make myself a sandwich. As I gathered the cheese, ham, and lettuce for my sandwich, I paused to remember what I needed for school tomorrow. That's when I heard it, a singular high-pitched piano note echo throughout the house. The blood drained from my face as I looked down the stairs of our home. I froze in fear, unable to move a muscle. Slowly, I turned and saw the motion detector panel. It consisted of 6 lights, one for each room a sensor was in. I saw the lights for room 2, which was where I was, and room 6, which was where the piano was. They were flashing. All I could do was watch as the light for room 6 turned off, and subsequently the light for room 5 began flashing. It was then when I could hear running down the hallway. Grabbing the knife on the bench, I ran for one of the bedrooms and lay underneath the bed. I could hear someone running up the stairs as I lay there. Walking around the kitchen table, they tapped their fingers on the bench. Holding my breath, I waited as he approached the bedroom I was hiding in. He entered the room, but all I could see were his legs. He stood there silently, peered into the closet, then turned and left. Now was my chance. I left the bedroom quietly, clutching at the knife. I crept down the stairs slowly. However, as I reached the bottom stair, a soft creak left the floorboard.